prepared for him. "What is it now?" he said. Vanessa answered first, voice shaky in a way I knew was practiced. Natalie came in already angry. I was only helping with the donor event. My father looked at me with disappointment so smooth it was almost elegant. Must every issue become a performance? I opened my mouth then closed it because that was another pattern I had finally started naming. They didn't only insult me. They arranged the room so that my reaction became the offense. I said quietly no. But every time I ask a direct question, one of you turns me into the problem. My father exhaled like a patient man burdened by a difficult child. "You are too intelligent to behave this emotionally." I remember that exact sentence because it was one of his favorites. He used it whenever he wanted to imply that my feelings were not evidence, only flaws. I put the planning sheet down. "Fine. Dear event." Then I walked out before they could enjoy my expression. That afternoon, I drove to the office, shut myself in a conference room, and read the trust photos again. Then I made a folder on my laptop titled Q2 Vendor Materials and buried copies inside it. I forwarded them to a private email account I had never used for family business. After that, I sat completely still and stared at the blank wall for a long time. A part of me still wanted to believe I was overreacting. That part started dying when Howard Bell himself called me 3 days later. "Natalie," he said in his soft attorney voice, "your father mentioned you had questions about the summer event and governance matters." I almost laughed, phrasing governance matters. That was one way to describe being slowly edged out of your own life. "I didn't realize company planning had become a legal topic," I said. "Family businesses require sensitivity. They also require competence." A pause. "Of course. Your father values your contribution immensely. There are few things more insulting than hearing your role." My mother and Vanessa in the breakfast room with fabric samples spread across the table. At first I assumed they were planning a gala. Then I saw the folder labeled Mercer Estates Summer Event. "What's this?" I asked. My mother barely looked up. "A donor evening. At the house." "Yes." I picked up one of the planning sheets. My own name was nowhere on the host list. Vanessa's was. "You're having a major company-hosted event here and didn't tell me?" My mother gave me a thin smile. "Not everything requires your approval, Natalie." "That's not what I ask." Vanessa sipped coffee and shrugged. "Dad thinks fresh energy would be good." "Fresh energy," I repeated. "That's what we're calling an experience now." My mother set her cup down carefully. "This is exactly why your father worries about your judgment." I laughed once because I honestly couldn't help it. My judgment is the only reason half your contracts still exist. And there it was. That tiny second when truth enters a room and everybody resents the person who said it aloud. My mother's expression hardened. "Do not talk to me like that in my home. Your home. Not ours. Not the family's. Hers." The distinction was small, but it landed. Vanessa leaned back. "You always do this. You turn every conversation into a crisis because you can't stand not being the center of everything." I stared at her. "I'm not trying to be the center. I'm trying to stop you both from wrecking a business you don't understand." My mother stood. "Enough. You are becoming exhausting." Then my father entered, looked at our faces, and didn't ask what had happened. He already knew the shape of these scenes. He walked in as judge because that role had been evidence. But the meaning was clear. My father was discussing a future where Vanessa held power and I stayed useful without authority. It should have made me furious. Instead, the first thing I felt was embarrassment. I know how pathetic that sounds. But when you spend your whole life being the competent daughter, the mature one, the one everyone depends on, it becomes humiliating to realize you may have built your identity around a place that never planned to keep you. I called Graham again. He answered immediately. "What happened?" "I found documents in my father's office." I spoke quietly even though nobody was around. "Trust drafts, succession language, Vanessa gets influence, I get some insulting fake support role. Did you copy them?" I took photos. "Good." I leaned my head back against the seat. "I feel stupid." "No," he said. "You feel betrayed." "That's different." I closed my eyes. "Can I send them to you?" "Send them. I'll review them tonight." So I did. All 6 photos. 20 minutes later he texted. Not enough to prove final action, but enough to prove intent. Don't confront them yet. That last sentence irritated me immediately, which probably meant it was good advice. Still, the next few weeks became impossible to experience innocently. Once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. Vanessa started appearing in more meetings, always with just enough preparation to sound rehearsed. My mother began dropping comments about legacy, balance, and not everyone being suited for leadership pressure. My father started excluding me from conversations he used to automatically loop me into, then would casually ask for my input later as if he were being generous by allowing me to repair what he had already handed to someone less qualified. At home, the tone shifted too. One Saturday morning, I walked into the main house and found. I scanned the memo. It was written by Howard Bell's office and addressed to my father. It discussed an orderly transition of voting influence within Mercer and Vine in the event of Richard Mercer's retirement, incapacity, or strategic restructuring of family governance. Vanessa's name appeared twice. Mine appeared once, followed by the phrase advisory continuity role. Advisory continuity role. I read it again because surely I had misunderstood. I had spent 12 years building operational systems for that company. I had rebuilt vendor relationships after a contamination scare, negotiated pricing through a fuel crisis, and stopped a distributor lawsuit before it became public. Vanessa had posted campaign photos from Napa and called it brand development. My hands turned cold. Then I saw one more page tucked underneath. It was a proposed amendment to a family trust. I didn't have time to read all of it because footsteps sounded outside the office. I grabbed my phone and took 6 fast photos, then shoved the folder back exactly where I had found it. When Tessa knocked and stepped in, I was holding a completely unrelated contract and trying to breathe normally. "Found it?" she asked. "Yeah," I said. "It was buried." She gave a sympathetic smile. "He files things like a spy." When she left, I closed the cabinet, but I could still feel the ghost of that folder in my hands. That evening, I sat in my car outside the carriage house and looked at the photos again before going inside. The images weren't perfect, but they were legible enough to haunt me. Howard Bell's memo was careful, polished, and vague in the way legal strategy often is when it wants to avoid creating something? I don't know yet. I rolled onto my side and looked out at the garden lights beyond the window. But Vanessa was in on one of my strategic meetings this morning. Dad had a folder when I walked in and Maria said Howard Bell was at the house. That could be routine. Maybe. He was quiet for a beat. "Do you want me to take a look at anything?" "Not formally. Just as your fiancé who doesn't trust wealthy families who use the phrase routine too often." That made me smile a little. "I don't have anything to show you." "Then keep your eyes open," he said. "And Natalie?" "Yeah. Don't assume they're smarter than you just because they raised you." After I hung up, I lay there with that sentence in my chest. Don't assume they're smarter than you just because they raised you. For the first time in a long time, I wondered whether I had confused obedience with intelligence. And once that thought settled in, I couldn't shake it. A few days later, I found the first real red flag. I was in my father's office at headquarters looking for a signed vendor agreement he had insisted he left in the side credenza. He was in Chicago for meetings and the distributor needed the document before noon. His assistant, Tessa, had already checked everywhere obvious. So I unlocked the lower cabinet with the office master key and started pulling files. Most were exactly what I expected. Tax records, real estate files, insurance renewals. Then my hand landed on a navy folder with my name on a tab label, not Natalie Mercer. Just Natalie. That alone was strange. I opened it. Inside were copies of trust documents, a life insurance summary, an old performance review, and what looked like a draft board recommendation memo. I wasn't trying to snoop at first. I was looking for a contract. But the moment I saw the words succession planning and transitional leadership, my stomach dropped. That night, after dinner, I stood in the kitchen helping Maria, our longtime housekeeper, pack leftovers into glass containers. Maria had worked for our family since I was 14. She was practical, warm, and careful with what she said. She noticed everything. That night, she kept glancing toward the hallway. "You should go rest," I told her. "I can finish these." She lowered her voice. "Your father had Mr. Bell in his office this afternoon." I looked up. Howard Bell, the family attorney. She nodded once. I tried to keep my voice neutral. Did you hear why? No. She pressed the lid onto a container and met my eyes for 1 second too long. But your mother had that tight smile she gets when she thinks she's already won. Maria rarely said things like that. She didn't gossip, and she never involved herself unless she was worried. I laughed it off for her sake. Maybe it's another trust adjustment or Vanessa's spending. Maybe, she said, but the words sounded like a warning, not agreement. That night, lying in bed in the carriage house, I stared at the ceiling fan turning slowly in the dark. My phone buzzed with a message from Graham. You okay? I typed back, just tired. The 3 dots disappeared, then came back. You've been a lot lately. I didn't answer right away because he was right. Something in me had been dragging for months, not physically exactly, more like spiritually exhausted. Every day at the office required 10 small battles I wasn't supposed to name. Every family dinner came with one comment I had to swallow. Every success somehow became my father's leadership, and every problem became my lack of tact. I finally replied, I think they're planning something. A minute later he called. I answered on the second ring. Hey, what kind of? Vanessa's face fell for a fraction of a second. My father gave me a cool look. You don't assign your sister work like a clerk. Then what exactly is she learning? That conversation ended there, but something about the room stayed with me all day. Not because Vanessa was involved. That alone wasn't new. My mother had been trying to push her into the business in pretty little roles for years. It was the way the folder disappeared when I walked in. The way my father watched me instead of the charts. The way Vanessa didn't make one of her usual jokes about being allergic to spreadsheets. Something was moving under the surface. That evening, my mother insisted we all have dinner in the main house. She had invited 2 neighbors over and wanted the table to look warm but elegant, which meant candles, polished silver, and everyone acting like they liked each other. Graham came late from court and slid into the seat beside me with an apology under his breath. Long day, I whispered. He nodded. Motion hearing ran over, laughing at something my mother said. My father carved roast chicken like he was filming an advertisement for control. At one point our neighbor, Mrs. Holloway, turned to me and smiled. Richard tells me you practically run the company now. Before I could answer, my father chuckled. Natalie likes to make herself indispensable. The table laughed softly. I smiled too, because that's what I had trained myself to do. But underneath the smile, something pinched. There was a difference between being appreciated and being used. I had known that in theory. It was much harder to admit it in your own childhood dining room. Graham touched my knee under the table once, lightly, as if he could feel the shift in me. Later. My birthday. I arrived early at the office and found Vanessa in our conference room with my father. She almost never came in before noon, and she never came in dressed like she had a real meeting. But that day she was wearing a cream blazer, her hair perfectly done, smiling over an open folder while my father pointed at sales reports on the table. When I stepped in, they both looked up too quickly. Natalie, my father said, closing the folder halfway. You're early. It's 8:15, I said, glancing at Vanessa. Since when are either of you here before coffee? Vanessa laughed a little too brightly. Dad asked me to sit in on something. Something turned out to be the spring distributor expansion plan. My plan. The one I had spent 3 months building. I looked at the charts, then at my father. Why is Vanessa in this meeting? My father leaned back like I was being difficult. Because she needs to learn more of the company. She's head of brand partnerships in title only, I said before I could stop myself. She hasn't reviewed the contract risks, vendor terms, or logistics. Vanessa's smile tightened. You really know how to make people feel welcome. I'm asking a work question. And I'm giving you a family answer, my father said. One day this business should feel familiar to both of my daughters. The phrase should feel familiar sat strangely with me. My grandfather's will had always been discussed in whispers, half-facts, and sentimental nonsense. I had grown up hearing that the company belonged to the family, which in practice meant my father acted like it belonged to him. Fine, I said. Then she can start with inventory reconciliation and the Q3 shipping projections. Title was still just Director of Strategy. My father liked titles that sounded generous and vague. They gave credit without giving power. People at work respected me. Some of them even trusted me more than they trusted him, though nobody would say that directly. Not in a family company. I lived in the carriage house behind my parents' main property on Hawthorne Lane. It sounds romantic when I say carriage house, but it was really a renovated guest building with white siding, a narrow porch, and windows that looked toward the back garden. My mother liked telling people it was my choice to stay close because I valued family. The truth was more complicated. My father had convinced me it was practical. I was always needed at the main house for dinners, guests, planning meetings, crisis conversations. The company office was only 15 minutes away, and I had been taught so thoroughly that my role was to hold things together that I hardly noticed how little of my life belonged to me. At the time, I was also engaged. His name was Graham Foster, and if this story had happened 2 years earlier, I would have sworn he was the one truly good thing I had chosen for myself. He was a corporate attorney, calm and sharp, with dark hair that always looked slightly out of place by the end of the day. He didn't talk too much, which I used to find comforting. He listened carefully, asked smart questions, and never seemed impressed by the money or performance around my family. We had been together for almost 3 years. He had proposed the previous winter at a quiet restaurant by the river, and when I called my mother crying happy tears, she had gone silent for 2 seconds before saying, "Well, that certainly happened fast." I ignored that, too. The first odd feeling should have mattered more than it did. It started on a Monday morning in April, about 6 weeks before. Then there was my younger sister, Vanessa. Vanessa was 27, charming in a loud, careless way, and she had been treated like sunlight her whole life. She could show up late, forget promises, spend money she didn't earn, and somehow the room always bent around her. If I worked all week and handled a crisis quietly, nobody noticed. If Vanessa walked into the kitchen and remembered to compliment my mother's blouse, suddenly she was the sweetest girl in the world. For years, I told myself that was normal. Families had favorites. Parents had blind spots. It hurt, but it didn't mean they didn't love me. That was the lie I kept feeding myself. Our family owned a mid-sized gourmet food company called Mercer and Vine. We sold preserves, sauces, boxed dessert mixes, and specialty fruit products to upscale grocery chains across 3 states. My grandfather had started it with 1 jam recipe and 1 rented kitchen. By the time he died, it was worth real money. My father took over, expanded distribution, and built the brand into something people recognized. Publicly, he was the face of the company. Privately, I was the one who kept a lot of it from falling apart. I had started helping when I was in college. First it was spreadsheets, then vendor calls, then quality control issues, then product launches, late-night shipping problems, contract rewrites, payroll emergencies, distributor complaints, and every ugly little thing that could sink a business if someone didn't handle it fast. By the time I turned 30, I was effectively running operations, though my official "a daughter like you" was never ours in any way that mattered. So, stop standing there like this house still belongs to you. My mother said that to me in the middle of my birthday dinner with my father calmly sipping wine beside her while my sister watched from the other end of the table. 9 months later, the same 2 people who told me they had never loved me could only sit frozen and pale when I thanked them again in front of a room full of witnesses. As always, before we dive into a story with an ending that's going to feel really satisfying for you, let's do a quick roll call. Type present and the city you're watching from in the comments. For everyone who has liked and subscribed, I pray that God makes your problems easier, widens your provision, and keeps your body healthy. Thank you, my friends. Now, listen carefully to my story. If you've ever been a child who carried a whole family on your back while they acted like you owed them more, this story is going to hit you hard. What happened to me started with 1 sentence on my birthday, but the truth behind that sentence had been building for years. And by the time I finally understood what my smile really meant that night, it was already too late for my parents to take anything back. My name is Natalie Mercer, and for most of my life, I thought love was something you earned by being useful. I was 32 when everything finally broke open, but if I'm being honest, the crack had been there since I was a kid. I was the oldest daughter in a family that looked perfect from the outside. My father, Richard Mercer, was the kind of man people called disciplined and respected. He wore expensive gray suits, spoke in a steady voice, and had a way of making even cruel decisions sound reasonable. My mother, Elaine Mercer, was polished, social, and careful with appearances. She volunteered at charity events, hosted beautiful dinners, and knew exactly how to smile at people while cutting them apart behind closed doors.